At a company I used to work for, I was in charge of trade shows. But there were some problems. First of all, I didn't know what I was doing. Nobody trained me to do it. Second thing is, guess what? We weren't very good at it. I think really we were pretty poor at it. And the third part is, it was a lot of hard work. So when you're doing something where you don't know what you're doing, and you're not good at it, and it's hard work, that's not much fun, and it's not something you want to do. Things change. I had the opportunity to learn from the best known and probably the brightest trade show expert in the country. He consults on 15 of the top 20 trade shows in the country. He gets paid, I think now his rate is about $8,500 for half a day, plus expenses. And I learned some things. So we went from, with our company, from not knowing what we were doing to winning Best in Show 2 years out of 3 at a trade show with about 300 exhibitors. So we knew what we were doing, we did it better, and it was still a lot of work, but the work was different. And it was different because it was fun and we felt like we were successful. I don't say that to say I know a whole lot about trade shows. I really don't. What I do know I've learned from others. But I do know a few things, and those things that I think are really essential in that handout that we've got. So here we go. We'll talk about some important numbers to keep in mind, some things you should have in your booth, important concepts to keep in mind, and some bonus tips. Here we go. Important numbers to keep in mind: 2.5 and 3. Here's why they're important. Studies have shown that for someone to walk 10 feet in a trade show, it takes an average of 2.5 seconds for them to do that. I was at a trade show once in New York City at the Javits Center, where people didn't want to do much except walk right down the middle of that aisle. There was somebody else in the booth, and it was a long, long show. And so to keep from going brain dead, I decided, you know what? I read the survey, I'm going to do it. And it was Mississippi 1, Mississippi 2, and it's 2.5 seconds. So that number is pretty solid. You've got 2.5 seconds as people are walking by for people to size up what's going on in your booth. And there are 3 things, the second number, 3 important things that people need to understand as they see your booth. Here's what they need to see. And if you're taking notes on anything that I'm going over with you, I would write this down. Here are the 3 things. People need to know who you are. So they're asking, who are you? That's a question they need to have answered. Second question they need answered is, what do you do? And the third question that you need to answer for them is, why should I do business with you? So the questions, who are you? What do you do? Why should I do business with you? Those are important things for people to understand. Second point, what should I have in my booth? First thing, things to show, appropriate messaging. What should be covered in the messaging? 3 things, and what are they? Who are you? What do you do? Why should I do business with you? As far as the why should I do business with you, I mean the who you are, you know who you are, and what you do, those things should be very clear. There have been companies I've been with in the past where somebody will walk up to the booth and say, so what do you do? Which looking back says, what they were saying is, your messaging isn't working because you're not answering one of those critical questions. So make sure that it's very clear. And think bullet points. You've got 2.5 seconds. Who are you, what you do, and then the why should I do business with you. There are a lot of ways you can deal with that. I think one of the ways you can deal with that, and really a hidden secret, is the power of testimonials. It's the power of testimonials. It's one thing for me to say, I work for this company, here's why you should do business with us. Very natural for somebody coming to the booth to say, well, of course you're saying that. You work for the company. It's your job to say that. It's another thing with the testimonial, and in trade shows that we've been in, we find real power in testimonials. To say, okay, here's what someone says about what we do. It's somebody who's not on the payroll, they're not related to somebody on the payroll. It's a testimonial of somebody saying, we enjoyed working with this company, they did this, this, and this. And we think you should work with them too. Testimonials are an important thing, but it helps to reinforce why people should be doing business with you and your company. So what should you show in the booth? Appropriate messaging. And the goal of the messaging in your booth, and this is a lesson I learned in a hard way long ago, was the 10 by 10 space that you've got for your booth. It's not essential that you fill every square inch of that 10 by 10 space with something and all kinds of things about your company. The goal of the booth is not necessarily to provide everything that you need to know or to provide information that customers need to know about your company. The goal of the booth is to help them to stop, interact with you, and engage with you about why they ought to do business with you. So, at extremes, if you have very spare, clean messaging in your booth, at one extreme, where people very readily in that 2.5 seconds can say, oh, here's what they do, here's who they are, here's why we need to do business. At one extreme or the other extreme, you know what? We're going to put everything we can in this booth to provide information for people. If you've got to lean one way or another, having that messaging clean and clear will be a lot easier for people to take in. I used to work in book publishing. That's where I met Steve Miller, the booth consultant. And my thinking there was put as many titles of the over 1,000 titles that we published, have them in the booth. People may need to see them. What happens when there's too much information? In that 2.5 seconds, you don't say, oh, let's slow down, let's sort it all out. Instead, most people's minds say, too much information, can't take it all in, what do I do? Keep walking to somewhere where it's safer, where I can grasp the information that's there. So, key tip, make sure that the messaging is appropriate for what you're doing and for the audience. Make sure that it's nice and clean and clear. Things to give away in the booth, appropriate things to hand out. There are two types of things. If, for example, there's somebody like Tim Leverage who says, you know what, there are customers we get who don't engage us right at the booth. It might be, what, 2-3 years down the road, Tim, where somebody says, I saw you at the Business Expo back in 2010, and I've got something that you handed me in the booth, and it's magnetized, it's been on the refrigerator, I needed insurance, and so you know what? Insurance, it's on the magnet, I make a phone call. If you're looking, that's one kind of thing that you can hand out, something that will stay with someone for a long time. There's another type of thing that you can hand out in the booth, someone who says, you know what, I need information about the organization. There are two ways you can handle that handout, that request for literature. I've learned in time that if someone says, you know what, I don't want to talk, just give me some literature. Sometimes that's a request for literature. Sometimes that's someone saying, you know what, I really don't want to engage in conversation. I really don't want to say, no, I'm not interested in what you have, but I want to be polite. And so if I ask for literature, I'm not telling you no. And it's a way to get out of this conversation. That happens sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes. When that happens, what happens to the literature? It either stays in a bag that somebody's got until about a month later when they're done with the show and they say, toss, 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 keep this one, toss another one. Or before they leave the hall, it may end up in a receptacle somewhere. I think there's a better way to go if someone's asking for literature, and that can be, you know what, I'd be glad to email you some literature. That way you don't have to carry it. What does that accomplish? Number one, it gives you a name and some contact information. You've got an email address, you've got a name. It's a way to keep in touch. The other is, you're not printing literature that by some estimates, 85% of that, it's in a receptacle here, it's in recycling at the show, or it's in a bag and later on, maybe it doesn't get acted out. It's something worth thinking about.